The Companies Act 1956. Section 6, Meaning of Relative. The Companies Act 1956, Section 6, Meaning of Relative. This is a very important section. The expression relative occurs in many sections of the Companies Act 1956. Some sections carry different meaning for the expression relative, whereas section 6 carries different meaning for the expression relative. That is the reason the Companies Act 1956 says here, in this act, unless the context otherwise requires, many among us may be aware of this sentence. In this act, unless the context otherwise requires, how section 2 starts its definitions. Section 2 of the Companies Act 1956 starts with this statement: in this act, unless the context otherwise requires. Sometimes the context in other sections may require differently the term relative. It defines, its priorities may change from section to section depending upon the context. That is what we may understand, we may conclude from this statement: in this act, unless the context otherwise requires. It is not new meaning among us. We might have come across the definition of relative as it gets changed in some sections. Let us go to section 6. Before that, in the Companies Act 1956, section 2 carries some definitions of some important expressions which are there to occur in many sections. Section 2 carries some definitions like clause 41 of section 2 defines relative. Relative means with reference to any person. With reference to any person, anyone who is related to such person in any of the ways specified in section 6 and no others. Does it appear very simple? Let us again go to clause 41 of section 2 of the Companies Act 1956, how it defines the term relative. It defines relative means with reference to any person, anyone who is related to such person in any of the ways specified in section 6 and no others. It is giving a way to understand anyone who is related to such person in any of the ways specified in section 6. So we need to go to section 6 to understand the ways how a person is related to understand the expression relative. So let us jump to section 6 of the Companies Act 1956. So from clause 41 of section 2, we got direction that we need to understand the ways specified in section 6 to understand the term relative. Let us go to Section 6 of the Companies Act 1956. Here, a person shall be deemed to be a relative of another. A person shall be deemed to be a relative of another and only if they are members of a Hindu undivided family. See how it starts? Section 6 carries three clauses. Clause A, Clause B and Clause C. So, if we are able to meet any clause available in Section 6, meaning of relative beats. Section 6, meaning of relative. A person shall be deemed to be a relative of another. A person shall be deemed to be a relative of another if they are members of a Hindu undivided family, or if they are husband and wife, or if the one is related to other in the manner indicated in Schedule 1A. So, as we have come across three clauses, any one of the clause, if the situation meets, a person is identified as relative. Again, Section 6 of the Companies Act 1956, meaning of relative. A person shall be deemed to be a relative of another if and only if they are members of a Hindu undivided family, or if they are husband and wife, or if they are one is related to the other in the manner indicated in Schedule 1A. So, the available clauses, these are Clause A, Clause B, Clause C. Clause A says, if they are members of a Hindu undivided family. Clause B says, if they are husband and wife. Clause C says, if the one is related to the other in the manner indicated in Schedule 1A. Let us try to understand clause by clause of Section 6. Again, Section 6, meaning of relative. A person shall be deemed to be a relative of another if they are members of a Hindu undivided family. The expression members of a Hindu undivided family is wider term. The expression members of a Hindu undivided family is a wider term than co-personers and includes female members, including the wives of co-personers. This is a clarification from the department. In some cases, members of HUF, Hindu undivided family, may be a source of confusion and may turn as a real hurdle in situations where the act takes lead and may turn unfavorable. Very interesting when it comes to members of undivided family and Hindu undivided family. This is one option or one condition which, if it gets met, a person may be identified as relative. Section 6 of Companies Act 1956, meaning of relative. A person shall be deemed to be a relative of another if they are members of a Hindu undivided family. The expression members of a Hindu undivided family is wider term than co-personers and includes all female members, including the wives of co-personers. This is a clarification what we got from the department. In some cases, members of Hindu undivided family may be a source of confusion and may turn as real hurdle in situations where the act takes lead and may turn unfavorable. This is what we may understand from clause A of section 6. A person shall be deemed to be a relative of another if they are members of a Hindu undivided family. Let us go to clause B of section 6. Here it says a person shall be deemed to be a relative of another if they are husband and wife. If they are husband and wife. This we can clearly understand. We can go to now clause C of section 6, meaning of relative. A person shall be deemed to be a relative of another if the one is related to the other in the manner indicated in schedule 1A. A person shall be deemed to be relative of another if the one is related to the other in the manner indicated in schedule 1. What are these manners? Let us go to understand from schedule 1A. Schedule 1 say schedule 1A says list of relatives. Here we can understand at present there are 22 active persons are identified or relations. Here list of relatives. Let us go one by one of schedule 1A. First, father, mother including stepmother, third, son including stepson, 4, son's wife, 5, daughter including daughter, stepdaughter, 6, father's father, 7, father's mother, 8, mother's mother, 9, mother's father, 10, son's son, 11, son's wife, 12, son's daughter, 13, son's daughter's husband, 14, daughter's husband, 15, daughter's son, 16, daughter's son's wife, 17, daughter's daughter, 18, daughter's husband, 19, brother including stepbrothers, 20, brother's wife, 21, sister including stepsister, 22, sister's husband. Like this, there are 22 lines relatives are listed in schedule 1A. Relative. We come across this expression relative many times in the Companies Act 1956. Various contexts see this expression relative occurring in different sections. May we try to understand it, the term relative. How has this expression relative turned so significant in the Companies Act 1956? Can we ignore benami transactions? The expression benami enables us to understand how some businessmen resort to these transactions. We are aware the strong reason to read to resort these transactions where relatives play somehow important role or significant role in the process of escaping from different taxes that many among us are aware, which we can ignore for some time. This is the main reason why the expression relative has assumed so much importance in the Companies Act 1956. There may be some other reasons which we may aware or we may not like to recollect. As long as tax problems are hounding business persons, there are situations of expectations to share economic benefits of the hardships and hard work of businessmen, which business community may not come forward openly to share their interests, their economic environment, their economic benefits. Such economic transactions may carry these inherent binomy transactions. Really, it appears very hard to share our odd end profits. Relatives, the term, play a very important role in these transactions. The Act wants to curtail similar transactions. Similar transactions means where relatives play important roles in the process of escaping or avoiding payments of taxes and saving odd end profits, odd end money to the businessmen. The Act wants to curtail similar transactions. The Companies Act is one. Apart from this Companies Act, there are different acts. The Income Tax Act also is in the process to collect taxes where involving the relatives, many businessmen, many business transactions, many economic transactions are taking place to avoid or to escape from the taxes. The Companies Act 1956 wants to curtail similar transactions and wants to restrict the relationships by this definition. By this definition means Section 6 of the Companies Act 1956. Sometimes the definition appears very interesting as the definition refers some persons in one direction only. Again, sometimes this definition appears very interesting as the definition refers some persons in one direction only. The other direction it has ignored. Is it not interesting? Yes. Other side, this definition has seen many businessmen in confusion to understand whether any enumerated relative is a partner or member or director, as some sections refer this expression relative, discouraging them not to have economic relations where clash of interest may take place. May we repeat it again? The definition has seen many businessmen in confusion to understand whether any enumerated relative is a partner or member of director, as some sections refer this expression relative, discouraging them not to have economic relations where clash of interest may take place. There are many sections which refer this expression relative. Yes, we may refer them after some time. We need to refer the Companies Amendment Act 1960 here. Let us see what it said. The redraft of Section 6 is based on the recommendations of the report, so that in order to make it practicable for the officers of a company to comply with the provisions of several sections in which the expression relative occurs, very remote relationships may be excluded from the purview of the definition, the effect of which we are now seeing this definition available. May we make ourselves convenient by referring Schedule 1A to understand the expression relative by going through again the list of relatives. Number 1, father. Number 2, mother, including stepmother. Number 3, son, including stepson. Number 4, son's wife, daughter-in-law, otherwise. Number 5, daughter. Number 6, father's father. Number 7, father's mother. Number 8, mother's mother. Number 9, mother's father. Number 10, son's son. Number 11, son's wife. Number 12, son's daughter. Number 13, son's daughter's husband. Number 14, daughter's husband. Number 15, daughter's son. Number 16, daughter's son's wife. Number 17, daughter's daughter. Number 18, daughter's husband. Number 19, brother. Number 20, brother's wife. Number 21, sister, including stepsister. Number 22, sister's husband. Just we enumerated the relatives mentioned in Schedule 1A. Some interesting relationships may stand to question us in other direction. May we have an interesting time to understand how quizzical are these situations. It appears so to us, but the act is correct and its approach is also correct. How it is correct? Let us have some understanding. Daughter's husband, in other words, son-in-law, is relative of a father-in-law or mother-in-law. Again, daughter's husband is relative of a father-in-law or mother-in-law. You may ask, is father-in-law not a relative of daughter's husband? You may also ask, is mother-in-law not a relative of daughter's husband? Yes, father-in-law is not a relative of daughter's husband. As far as the Companies Act 1956 is concerned in its definition of relative. Yes, mother-in-law is also not a relative of daughter's husband as far as the Companies Act 1956 is concerned in its definition of relative. Is it queer to listen? But it is so. As far as this act is concerned for the transactions concerned. This is what Department of Company Affairs stated while explaining the scope of the term relationship. Further, it also said that Section 6 Clause C of the Companies Act 1956 doesn't cover reciprocal relationships. Underline. Section 6 Clause C of the Companies Act 1956 doesn't cover Reciprocal relationships in the reverse direction doesn't cover reciprocal relationships in the reverse direction in the case of any of the relatives enumerated in the above cited Schedule 1A, except those expressly included in the schedule itself. Now it may be clear many of us why the Department of Company Affairs has stated so. Similarly, son's wife. Let us try to understand. Son's wife. Son's wife is relative of a father-in-law or mother-in-law. You may ask now, is father-in-law not a relative of son's wife? You may also ask, is mother-in-law not a relative of son's wife? Yes, father-in-law is not a relative of son's wife. Yes, mother-in-law is also not a relative of son's wife. As far as this Companies Act 1956 is concerned in its definition of relative, Section 6, Clause C. Let us have an illustration. Assume that Mr. Amitabh Bachchan is a director of a company. Mr. Amitabh Bachchan and Mrs. Jaya Bhaduri are husband and wife. We all know. Now, Mrs. Jaya Bhaduri is identified as a relative as far as Amitabh Bachchan is concerned. Mr. Amitabh Bachchan's son, Mr. Abhishek Bachchan, is identified as a relative, and Mr. Abhishek Bachchan's wife, Aishwarya Bachchan, is also identified as a relative. If we come across Section 6, Clause 3 and Schedule 1A. Whereas Mr. Amitabh Bachchan is not identified as a relative of Aishwarya Bachchan, even though he is her father-in-law. Similarly, Mrs. Jaya Bhaduri is not identified as a relative of Aishwarya Bachchan, even though she is mother-in-law. Whereas Aishwarya Bachchan is relative of Mr. Amitabh Bachchan. Aradhya Bachchan, another point here. Aradhya Bachchan, daughter of Mr. Abhishek Bachchan and Mrs. Aishwarya Bachchan, are identified as a relative of Mr. Amitabh Bachchan. Here, Aradhya Bachchan is son's daughter, that is Abhishek Bachchan's and Aishwarya Bachchan's daughter. Aradhya Bachchan is relative to Mr. Amitabh Bachchan. Other side, Amitabh Bachchan is also identified as a relative of Aradhya Bachchan in case of Aradhya Bachchan. Here, being father's father, Mr. Amitabh is identified as a relative. Very interesting point. We are able to clearly understand it. May we have another interesting relationship get referred? See, a person's sister's husband is his relative. A person's sister's husband is his relative. Other side, he himself cannot be treated as a relative of his sister's husband, as the other relationship is not listed in Schedule 1A. Very interesting. A person's sister's husband is his relative. Other side, he himself cannot be treated as a relative of his sister's husband, as the other relationship is not listed in Schedule 1A. Given definition of relative doesn't cover reciprocal relationships in the reverse direction. Again, given definition of relative doesn't cover reciprocal relationships in the reverse direction in the case of any of the relatives enumerated in the above cited Schedule 1A, except those expressly included in the Schedule 1A itself. May we go to see some relationships which are a bit different. Here we come across adoption. Mr. Ritesh Modi for illustration. Mr. Ritesh Modi is a director of Messrs. ABC Waters Limited. Mr. Ritesh Modi is a director. Mr. Vijay Modi is a son of Mr. Ritesh Modi. So Mr. Vijay Modi is identified as a relative of Mr. Ritesh Modi as per this list of relatives. Schedule 1A of the Companies Act 1956 is concerned. Mr. Ritesh Modi is a relative, is a director. Mr. Vijay Modi is a son of Mr. Ritesh Modi. So Mr. Vijay Modi is identified as a relative of Mr. Ritesh Modi as per this list of relative. Schedule 1A of the Companies Act 1956 is concerned. Till the year 2011, that is Mr. Vijay Modi is identified. So in the year 2011, Mr. Kanchan Kirloskar adopted Mr. Vijay Modi, who is a son of Mr. Ritesh Modi. Here, Mr. Kanchan Kirloskar adopted Mr. Vijay Modi, who is a son of Mr. Ritesh Modi. After this adoption development, does Mr. Vijay Modi stand as a relative of Mr. Ritesh Modi? Again, after this adoption development, does Mr. Vijay Modi stand as a relative of Mr. Ritesh Modi? Maybe a question we may get. You are right. Actually, we don't think so. Mr. Vijay Modi stands as a relative of Mr. Ritesh Modi is what we strongly believe from some point of view. But the Companies Act 1956 perceives it in different angle after the adoption development. It doesn't think as what we think. It always relates the list of relatives Schedule 1A. Mr. Vijay Modi ceases to have any relationship with his previous parents, that is Mr. Ritesh Modi, on this effect of adoption. Does it appear very sad? But as far as this Companies Act 1956 Schedule 1A is concerned, it is so. Again, Mr. Vijay Modi ceases to have any relationship with his previous parents, that is Mr. Ritesh Modi, on this effect of adoption. Another situation, an illegitimate child. Yes, what about this relationship? The Act ignored it. There is a case law, Lakshmi Kutti versus Mohandas AIR 1990. May we refer some sections of the Act where the relationship expression plays important role. Let us go to section 3, subsection 1, clause 3. Here, private company means a company which has a minimum paid up capital of 1 lakh rupees or such a higher paid up capital as may be prescribed. And by its articles, it prohibits any invitation or acceptance of deposits from persons other than its members, directors, or their relatives. Underline the term relative here. So private company by its articles prohibits any invitation of acceptance of deposits from persons other than its members, directors, or their relatives. Here we can understand private company can accept deposits from its members, from its directors, and from the relatives of directors or relatives of members. Here we come across the term relative. You may also recollect an expression I referred earlier. In this act, unless the context otherwise requires. Till now, the definition, the explanation we are coming across in the process of understanding the term relative may stand very important, and it is observed in some sections of the Companies Act in 1956. It is not necessary that the term relative, which carries the definition, may be so in different sections of the Companies Act 1956 also, because it may change, it may vary, as the act itself says. In this act, unless the context otherwise requires. If the context requires otherwise, the definition of relative we are coming across from section 6 may not hold good. Let us refer to section 217, where the term expression relative we may come across. Here in section 217, some sections now we are going to refer where the term relative we may come across in the Companies Act 1956. Section 217, Board's Report. Subsection 1. There shall be attached to every balance sheet laid before a company in general meeting report by its board of directors with respect to the state of the company affairs. Like this it goes. Here in subsection 2A of section 217 board's report, we come across the board's report shall also include a statement. The board's report shall also include a statement showing the name of every employee of the company who, if employed throughout the financial year, was in receipt of remuneration for that year, which in the aggregate was not less than such amount as may be prescribed. That is 60 lakh rupees with effect from 1st April 2011. Here, one interesting point what we need to understand is the statement referred to in clause A shall indicate whether any such employee is a relative of any director. This is what we need to focus our attention on, the expression relative, how it is occurred. The statement referred to in clause A shall also indicate whether any such employee is a relative of any director or manager of the company, and if so, the name of such director and such other particulars as may be prescribed. This is how in section 217 we come across the expression relative. Let us go to section 295. Loans to directors. Here in this section 295, loans to directors, we may come across the term expression relative. Here, save as otherwise provided in subsection 2, no company hereinafter in this section referred to as the lending company, without obtaining previous approval of the central government in their behalf, shall directly or indirectly make any loan to whom any director of the lending company or of a company which is its holding company or any partner or relative of any such director. Underline the word relative here. Any firm in which any such director or relative is a partner. This is how section 295 comes across word relative. Loans to directors. Same as otherwise provided in subsection 2. No company shall, without obtaining the previous approval of the central government in their behalf, shall directly or indirectly make any loan to any director of the lending company or of a company which is its holding company or any partner or relative of any such director. any firm in which any such director or relative is a partner. This is how we can come across the term relative in section 295. Let us go to section 297. Board's sanction to be required for certain contracts in which particular directors are interested. Here, the term relative comes and plays very important role. Except with the consent of the board of directors of a company, except with the consent of the board of directors of a company, a director of the company or his relative, underline the word relative. Except with the consent of the board of directors of a company, a director of the company or his relative, a firm in which such a director is or a relative, like this, some conditions it has put. Then it says, shall not enter into any contract with the company. This is what we need to underline, shall not enter into any contract with the company. Except with the consent of the board of directors of a company, a director of the company or his relative shall not enter into any contract with the company. This is a very important point where section 297 has some conditions in the case of relative. Now let us go to section 314. Section 314 of the Companies Act 1956. Director, etc., not to hold office or place of profit except with the consent of the company accorded by a special resolution. Except with the consent of the company accorded by a special resolution, no director of a company shall hold any office or place of profit, and no partner or relative, underline, no partner or relative of such director, no firm in which such director or relative shall hold any office or place of profit carrying a total monthly remuneration of such sum as may be prescribed, not less than 10,000 rupees for the purpose of this class. Like this, the term relative we may come across in different sections of the Companies Act 1956. Let us have another section, section 370, loans to companies under the same arrangement. No company hereinafter referred in this section as a lending company shall make any loan to or give any guarantee or provide any security in connection with a loan made by any other person to or any other person by any body corporate, unless the making of such loan, the giving of such guarantee or the provision of such security has been previously authorized by a special resolution of the lending company. Section 370. Like this, in this section 370, there is a clause carrying the term relative. The term relative has got its definition which we come across till now. There are some other important points we need to recollect, like Reserve Bank of India from its press release September 2009 date 30th. September 30th 2009, it says the Income Tax Act 1961 has been amended with effect from 1st October 2009 to provide that any gift in kind, being an immovable property or any other property, the value of which exceeds 50,000 rupees, will become taxable in the hands of donee, underline, will be taxable in the hands of donee being an individual or a Hindu undivided family as income from other sources under clause 7 of subsection 2 of section 56 of the Act. Therefore, any such person who receives a gift of any such property on or after October 1st, 2009 must pay the income tax due on the value of the gift and disclose the taxable value of such property in the return of income for assessment year 2010-11. and subsequent years. We have come across this press note to understand that relative is defined in the act as spouse, 2 brother or sister, 3 brother or sister of the spouse, 4 brother or sister of either of the parents, 5 any lineal ascendant or descendant, 6 spouse of any of the relative at clause 2 or 5 of the individual. Gifts received from these relatives will not be subject to tax. See how the term relative is defined in the press note, press release of the Government of India Ministry of Finance as far as gift is concerned. We need to understand which act we are going to take into consideration before understanding the term relative. As far as the Companies Act 1956 is concerned, the term relative carries some definition. In the very Companies Act 1956, depending upon the context, the definition may vary. Section may provide some other inclusions or exclusions. That is what the Companies Act 1956 itself, it says, in this act unless the context otherwise requires. This statement we always need to understand when we are going to correlate the definition given in section 2 of the Companies Act 1956. There may be some understanding among us because many among us may be dealing with the Companies Act 1956 one side, on the other side Income Tax Act and other acts. The term relative carries definition in the Companies Act 1956 may not be similar with the definition given in section of the Company Income Tax Act 19 Income Tax Act. Here, relatives under the Income Tax Act relate to concept. Income Tax Act clause 41 section 2 says relative in relation to an individual means relative in relation to an individual means the husband, wife, brother or sister or any lineal ascendant or descendant of that individual. Clause 41 of section 2 of the Income Tax Act. What is the meaning of the term relative? Clause 41 of section 2 defines as relative in relation to an individual means the husband, wife, brother, sister or any lineal ascendant or descendant of that individual. This is how the term relative is defined in the Income Tax Act 1956. Why I referred the definition of available in income tax is just to correlate, which may be helpful whenever we need to go to Income Tax Act and when we come back to the Companies Act 1956, we may get confused naturally. However, clarity we may find from the sections available in the Companies Act 1956 and the Income Tax Act, because some sections of the Companies Act 1956 carry the meaning of relative based on the context apart separately, and even it takes place in the Income Tax Act. Till now, we are able to refresh ourselves the term relative. Again, Clause 41 of Section 2 of the Companies Act 1956 defines relative. Relative means with reference to any person, anyone who is related to such person in any of the ways specified in Section 6 and no other. But here we need to understand the statement in this act unless the context otherwise requires. This statement we need to always remember, because if context changes, some sections may have different definitions which may not be similar to the enumerated points in Schedule 1A. Let us go to Section 6 for again understanding meaning of relative. A person shall be deemed to be a relative of another if and only if they are members of a Hindu undivided family. Clause B, they are husband and wife. Clause C, the one is related to the other in the manner indicated in Schedule 1A. May we go to list, Schedule 1A. List of relatives: father, mother, son, son's wife, daughter, father's father, father's mother, mother's mother, mother's father, son's son, son's wife, son's daughter's husband, daughter's husband, daughter's son, daughter's son's wife, daughter's daughter, daughter's husband, brother including stepbrother, brother's wife, sister including stepsister, sister's husband. This is how we come across in Schedule 1A in the process of understanding the term relative. Once again, I need to remember myself and remind myself the definition available in Section 6 and the list of relatives in Schedule 1A may hold very important position in the Companies Act 1956. At the same time, we also need to understand that some sections may have different understandings about the term relative. This is how we need to recollect. It says in this act unless the context otherwise requires. See, underline, unless the context otherwise requires. So we refer some sections in understanding in the process about the definition of relative. Thank you.